Hello, my name is Mann Maxwell, and this is my video presentation for ECON 3100, Economics of Sustainability Policy. For my paper and presentation, I decided to take a look at the debate between gas and electric vehicles, while taking into consideration economic factors such as purchase price, depreciation, maintenance and fuel or electricity costs, and the impact on GDP. I've also taken a look at environmental factors such as emissions in production, as well as emissions in use and the recycling process after the cars are no longer useful for driving. Aside from these two focuses, I'll also describe some challenges with implementing electric vehicles, all the while evaluating policy. Prior to taking a look into why electric vehicles are better, it is important to consider the history of both gas and electric vehicles. Both cars have been in existence since the early 1900s, with gas cars having a lot more success, like we saw with the Ford Model T, which was the first major production vehicle. And while electric cars have been around for a while too, they really gained popularity in the 1960s due to the oil crisis that was ongoing. But due to backlash from the general public and oil prices that stabilized, they were kind of pushed to the side and focus was put back on gas cars. But more recently, as we've changed how we view the environment, the importance of a green future is clearer than ever, and this has led to an increase in EV production and sales. And this transition is backed by government legislation. Vehicle use is a major influencer of economic functions in North America. From a consumer standpoint, purchase price and depreciation are both factors of consideration that are to be taken into account when deciding between an electric and gas vehicle. Beyond the initial purchase lies an abundance of costs associated with owning a vehicle, and these also vary based on the type of vehicle. GDP is a telltale sign of economic well-being, and the impacts that both types of vehicles have on this economic function are to be taken into great consideration. When economic impacts are taken into account, it becomes clear that the electric vehicles are the better alternative when it comes to investment in a vehicle. Price is a major concern for all consumers, whether it's simply getting groceries at the store or more major purchases like a vehicle, as we're talking about. When looking at gas and electric cars, it's commonly understood that gas cars cost less upfront, and that's even with the electric rebates being taken into account, as we can see in the graph here. And beyond this lies depreciation that sets in after the vehicle has been used for a while. And for gas cars, depreciation is less. So not only do they cost less initially, but they lose their value at a slower rate than electric vehicles do. And this can be part of the reason why we haven't seen electric vehicles implemented in a major way. But to be considered too when looking at the economics of owning a vehicle are maintenance costs and the cost to power the car, whether it's gas or electricity. And maintenance and power, such as charging, is less for electric vehicles. And when you couple upfront purchase price and annual 10-year projections of maintenance and fuel expenses, owning an electric vehicle is actually cheaper. This is due in part to the major savings you get from charging a vehicle rather than using or spending money on gas to power it, as well as the decreased maintenance costs that lie with an electric car, such as the no need for oil changes, spark plugs, and other pieces of a motor that you find in a gas car. And something unique about electric vehicles is that they have regenerative braking, which essentially helps bring the car down naturally to a stop, and it uses this energy to power when going forward. So when you want an electric vehicle to slow down, as soon as you take your foot off the gas, many of them will start slowing down automatically, and this results in less wear and tear on the brakes. And from a long-term point of view, this is good because you don't have to get brake replacements as often. So with the upfront purchase and maintenance and fuel or charging costs for electric vehicles taken into account, it's key that we consider that electric vehicles are the cheaper option between the two. GDP is often regarded as a useful way to represent the strength and growth of a country's economy. Fuel production and sales contribute to the economy in a major way, and it is important to take this into account when comparing electric and gas vehicles. When looking at gas vehicles and their impact on GDP, it's good in Canada to look at the Alberta oil sands. The Alberta oil sands, with major oil extraction and, as a result, transportation of oil throughout Canada and the United States, backs the Canadian economy. And unfortunately, the practices here have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions in a major way, contributing to over 10% of Canada's emissions in total. And so this is kind of a negative effect of gas car production. Although it does help GDP, we see that GDP and greenhouse gas emissions hold a positive correlation. And as GDP increases, so does the impact on the environment. Whereas with electric vehicles, we see less of an impact on the environment, and there is the possibility of GDP growth through electric vehicles. An article titled "Better EV Policies Could Jumpstart $110 billion in Canadian GDP" on EnergyMix.com, the possibility of economic success through EV production is noted, as nearly 800,000 jobs and $110 billion in GDP is a reasonable goal by 2040. Electric vehicle production and use can put Canada's economy in a position where it does not rely so heavily on gas vehicle production, and in turn would reduce greenhouse gas emissions, a win-win situation. It is essential to evaluate the gas versus electric car debate from an environmental point of view, with sustainability and climate change being hot topics in modern society. Much like in the economic portion of this debate, the Canadian government has generated environmental policy that promotes electric vehicle use, as the goal in Canada is to have zero emissions from vehicles by 2050. Whether it is in production, use of vehicles, or disposal, both gas and electrically powered cars have an impact on the environment, although research shows that EVs leave a smaller environmental footprint, as alluded to further in this video. Now, unfortunately, I do have to admit that a startling amount of greenhouse gas emissions are required to produce the battery for an electric vehicle, with lithium mining being an essential part of the process. Interestingly, more emissions are generated by the production of an electric vehicle than there are in the production of a gas vehicle, as stated on cbc.ca in an article titled "Do Electric Cars Take More CO2 to Build Than They Save?" With regards to emissions, the amount that is generated by vehicle use post-production is to be considered too, an area in which electric vehicles hold a strong advantage. The total emissions of CO2 over the lifetime of a vehicle, being an electric vehicle, is still 50% less than emissions from a gasoline-powered vehicle. It is feasible that in the coming years, lithium batteries will become more efficient in terms of their longevity, how far the car will go, as well as the energy required to make them, and this will increase the gap that already exists between powering an electric vehicle and gas vehicles in terms of how much energy is used. Now, it's key that we take a look at what happens to the vehicles after they're no longer useful from a driving perspective. The difference between the two in terms of how much emissions there are in recycling the cars is set at 0.6 tons of emissions per vehicle when weighted in terms of if you took the fossil fuels and made that a weight in tons. So for gasoline powered cars, to recycle it, emits about 1.8 tons of carbon into the atmosphere, and electrics emit 2.4 tons, which is actually, unfortunately, a considerable difference. And while the difference is a noticeable one, it is crucial to consider that the components of an electric vehicle can be better recycled through direct cathode recycling and subsequent batteries that come after this. So essentially, yes, we are emitting more by producing electric vehicles, but the battery that lasts inside and possibly the brakes through regenerative braking, like we've talked about earlier, are able to be reused, and this kind of takes away from the environmental toll. If we can put them into other vehicles, this lessens the need for production of more parts, and the production of those parts that we're no longer needing has a toll on the environment too. So essentially, both vehicles carry pros and cons when it comes to disposal after use, but the potential of electric vehicle recycling comes with environmental benefits that should not go unnoticed. So to conclude the environmental portion of the video, vehicle use has a significant impact on the state of the ecosystems that we as a society rely on, whether it is in gas or electric vehicles. With this in mind, it is important to understand and analyze actions that promote positive change, such as electric vehicle use rather than gasoline vehicles. as net emissions are lower for EVs, as well as the fact that more of their parts can be used in the recycling process. Having taken both of these factors into account, it is important to consider challenges that may exist with electric vehicle implementation for a complete analysis, which I'll be alluding to further in this video. In the great debate that is electric versus gasoline-powered cars, it is important to consider some challenges that exist when implementing electric vehicles on a large scale. We already know that from an economic and environmental point of view, that electric vehicles are the better alternative, but it's time we consider some of the problems that may exist with implementing them on a large scale. Electric vehicle range is a valid concern that comes up when discussing the pros and cons of the electric vehicles. As of right now, the standard range for an electric vehicle is between 200 and 250 kilometers on a single charge, with some models such as the Tesla Model 3 or Model S being capable of upwards of 400 kilometers in a single charge. With this in mind, people that are looking to do substantial road trips, which is common in North America, may experience some difficulties. Whereas with gas cars, you can simply fill your car up with gas at a gas station and you're ready to go on the road. The Canadian Automobile Association states that there are 1,000 fast charging stations which are capable of charging a vehicle of upwards of 100 kilometers of power in just 20 minutes to half an hour. Whereas with the slower charging stations, there's around 3,000 to 4,000 of these, and they take a bit longer to power the cars. So in total, we have less than 5,000 charging stations in Canada, and I'm sure you could find a lot more gas stations than this. But with technological development and policy implementation, it is expected that we will also see positive change in the range of electric vehicles, as well as the availability of charging stations, as the Government of Canada has issued policy on this issue, or this topic as well. When these expected changes are combined, envisioning an electric future becomes much more realistic. The second of two challenges that exist with implementing electric vehicles on a larger scale would be the availability of lithium for the batteries. The input choices when it comes to powering electric vehicles are slim, as it is only lithium batteries that are capable of powering them. With this in mind, although the challenges do exist right now, it is likely that they will decrease as we move towards a greener future with more mining and developments in technology to help us get lithium in a cleaner way and in a larger quantity. So it is reasonable to expect that the prices that are associated with cost constraints could see decline in the coming years with progression in mining and in turn a greater supply of lithium expected. From an economic and environmental point of view, electric vehicles are a great alternative to gas vehicles. In terms of economics, the higher purchase price of an EV is made up for in their maintenance costs and charging costs that are significantly less over the lifetime of the car, as well as the positive impact that GDP that electric vehicles can have. The production of electric vehicles generates more greenhouse gas emissions than regular gas cars do. But quite similar to what we have seen on the economic side, is that over a long-term basis of production and use, emissions from electric vehicles are less than that of gas vehicles. Challenges do exist with implementing electric vehicles on a grand scale, such as a lack of charging stations and lithium supply, which has decreased the overall supply of electric cars. However, development in these areas is both possible and likely. With electric vehicles and sustainability going hand in hand, we will continue to see positive changes in transportation in both the short and long term as a result of policy and action. Again, my name is Mann Maxwell, and thank you for listening to my video presentation.